Welcome to the Apex Sunday podcast, hosted by myself, Robert Ross, and John Dowsett. And this week we're discussing the German Grand Prix for MotoGP. And John, how are you doing?
Wonderfully.
Wonderfully, great. And let's talk about the news first off, and not too much in news compared to what we've had with all the kind of silly season rider signings. It was Fabio's 100th race. It was Pecco's 200th race. It's the 75th anniversary this year, so the next race, they're doing the retro Silverstone livery. I'm looking forward to that. Raul Fernandez has re-signed with Trackhouse. He's starting to do a little bit better. He reminds me a little bit of riders that got given a chance to improve, even though they weren't immediately fast. He was very good in Moto 2. Pecco actually had a very, very, very bad first year. Better second year, but not that great. And then now he's a double world champion. So I really like it when teams do give certain riders some time. Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. Miguel is rumored to be going to Pramac for the Yamaha project. Kazakhstan is canceled and it's replaced by a second round at Misano in Italy. And the biggest news for me is Simon Crafar leaving the Dorna broadcast team and becoming the chairman of the MotoGP stewards panel. Hopefully he's replaced by an equally technical commentator, because I find sometimes I watch the BT Sports coverage and they have some riders that are not riding anymore, but are relatively recent. And they pick out technical issues and tires and sliding issues and so forth way, way better than the Dorna commentators usually do until they talk to Simon, who tells them what's going on. And kudos to Simon. He's got a new job next season where he's going to get yelled at by team principals and riders if they don't agree with his decisions. But hopefully it does improve the stewarding and the penalties that we've been seeing. So that needs to happen in Formula One too, I think.
Yeah. Well, it isn't quite as bad as it used to be, but in Formula One, but it's in the way Simon puts things in layman's terms for noobs like me is wonderful.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Liberty Media is kind of upset about this because that's his reputation for getting the new fans to understand what's going on in the races and so forth. I mean, he doesn't have when he first came in about 6 years ago, he doesn't have sort of a traditional broadcast voice and style. And he improved
No.
throughout his first season. And I think he's just fine. And I like that they give sort of non-traditional voices a chance in broadcasting, and he's worked out really well. And just congratulations, and sorry for your future yelling at by some upset people, but it'll happen. But I still think he'll improve the stewarding, so looking forward to that. All right, so let's move on to qualifying. And in qualifying, I think there's two stories here. Lots of crashes and some very bad crashes. We had Digia cracking his, what do you call this? Collarbone.
Scapula. Yeah.
Vinales had a big crash. Enea had a big crash. Mark had that huge high side going down the waterfall. Bruised ribs and a broken little finger. And Bezecchi had a crash as well. So lots of wounded riders, and riding wounded's got to hurt even with the painkillers, I would imagine.
Yeah. I can't even
Right?
fathom it.
Yeah, I mean, riding or driving a car would hurt as well, but at least you're sort of in one place and you get the G forces, but you're not moving your body and flexing all over the place. So it's got to be hard, especially shoulders and ribs. I can't
Ribs.
imagine it.
Oh my
So
God. No. I mean, that's
no,
one
no,
brave rider.
no cracks, but a big contusion. So, and I will say about Mark appeared to try to save that crash because it started on the front end, and when he tried to save it, it whipped it back to the back end and put him over. But he had difficulties with his other bike, so he thought that was the only bike he could use throughout the weekend. And that just amazed me that you can have that kind of thought in that kind of crash. Like, do I save this or do I
Yeah.
just roll it off.
Yeah.
So, and then we had him when he went out for his second run, Brattle impeding. That's a penalty that was deserved and that was obvious for a change. Sometimes when you see these impeding penalties, you're not too sure. And Trackhouse put two bikes on the front row or up in the top, so that was good for them. Good improvement. But as you say, brave riders coming through all those crashes, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Did you ever
Unbelievable.
race injured?
Not like that. No, nowhere near that.
Okay,
I mean,
okay,
I got bashed up a little bit, but nothing like that. And as you
right,
say, I mean, it's what hurts the most is when you're in a race car is when you're getting strapped in,
right.
and then once you're strapped in, if you're injured, it's kind of holds you all together, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, so let's move on to the sprint. So for the sprint, great start by Pecco. Raul Fernandez in the Trackhouse dropped back fast again. He seems to have improved his single lap, but needs some more experience in the tires, making them last even in a sprint, which is a bit of a surprise. But the top four were in a class of their own. There were a lot of early passes, but that was generally when they're on the relatively the same speed. Jorge pulled ahead. Oliveira finally coming good. He's a five-time race winner before, so coming in second. We finally see him get used to the 24 Aprilia. So he went from the 22 last year, never had the 23, skipped to the 24. So most riders have a little bit of issues adapting to bikes. Mark seems to be a little bit of an exception, but it was good to see Oliveira come good at last. Pecco openly said that Martin used his tires better than he did. Pecco said he was too conservative. And that comes back to what we'll talk about in the prime race, which is tire management, which is a huge issue at this track because it's a small circuit, but it's very slippery. Um, any thoughts on the sprint for you?
Uh, the photo finish was just mind-boggling.
At the end, yeah,
Oh my God, it was so close. It was so close, and
it
what an
was, wasn't
effort!
it?
What an effort! Now, also you said top four in class, sort of
Of
exercise.
their own,
Did what you expect them to do. Um,
yes,
how much of that is equipment, though?
yeah. I
Just
know it's a combination. I think as we see when we'll get into our season review, the next podcast, the Ducatis are doing very, very, very well through this half season. The Aprilias and KTM's not as good as you initially think. So I think the bikes are a big factor, but also the riders. My rider of the sprint is Martin. I think he did a spectacular job and took hold of that sprint from the beginning. It wasn't the most exciting sprint, so I give it a rating of 6. What about you? What's your rider and rating?
uh, uh, watching Marquez try and get ahead of riders and having a tough time, and then just stepping out. That was the highlight for me. So he's my
Right,
rider of the day. And other than that, you're right. It was relatively uneventful. But I'll still give it a 7.
right.
It
What
was fun to watch.
great track too. I love massive elevation changes
Fantastic.
right from the get go of turn one. Love to try it out in a sim sometime, and definitely will. All right, so let's move on to the race. Um, and as I said just previously, the race is largely about tire management. Many races are, but this one in particular, this circuit has a reputation for being very slippery, so the tires get worn down. 30% of the lap is spent on the left side of the tire, so it's a very heavy left side circuit, which is why Mark has such a great record here. He's got, I think, 11 consecutive victories from 125 through Moto 2 through MotoGP because he loves left-handers. So one time, a few years ago, there was a social media thing like, "What is your ideal track?" And Mark drew sort of a hexagon of all left-handers as a joke. That'd be his fastest thing. So I did notice that Oliveira was unable to replicate his sprint success. Maybe this is tire management. And we saw Morbidelli up there for the first time in a while, like at the very top, as he gets
Mhm.
adapted to this new bike. But again, I think now he needs to understand how to manage the tires while racing at the top. So he fell back a little bit, not too far, but he did fall back. So, and that crash he had with Mark, or that wasn't a crash, that little hit when Mark tried to pass him,
Yes.
they both agreed it was just a racing incident. So no, no post race drama after that. You know, we've seen a lot of post race drama in Formula One recently. Uh, I think the stories are Martin crashing out with 2 laps to go. Pecco thought they were in for a great last lap fight. You didn't think that Pecco could catch him? What are your thoughts on that?
No, no.
No.
And I watched as he had this wonderful lead, and all he had to do was drop it back down by 2%, 5%, and lose maybe a second a lap, and he would have taken the win. And he just threw it all away.
Hmm.
Look at you have to catch and pass, and he was what, 3 seconds ahead, 4 seconds
Hmm.
ahead. I mean,
No,
come
at
on.
the time it was only 1.5. It had gone down quite a lot. So I don't know. I
Yeah,
think people are a bit hard on Martin. I think he knows what he did. He acknowledged it. So it's just part of his growing process. I think he has massive potential to improve his racecraft. So I'm not going to be too hard on him.
this is the one
He could
thing
have done
that
better.
this is the one thing that I have to
Hmm.
say that MotoGP offers that no other sport offers. No other sport
Hmm.
offers. You watch these guys come off the track, they're humble, they're nice to each other. Unless something really nasty has happened, they're very, they will admit to their mistakes. And
Yes.
and and there's none of this nonsense of car racing where it's never my fault, even though it's definitely their fault, and it happens all the time. and
Yeah.
and and I don't know why that happens, and I don't know how they can be that delusional, but it's, yeah, it's wonderful. And you do hear some. I've got to be fair. There are some car racers that will say, I have to look at the footage, and they will come back at it
Sure.
and say, yes, I didn't belong there, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But I find across the board in MotoGP, you're getting the straight goods. And it's wonderful.
Yeah. Most of the time, for sure. And I think Martin, again, yeah, his racecraft will improve a little bit. The the thing about MotoGP is riders crash without another bike being involved far more frequently than four-wheel racing, obviously.
Hmm.
You know, it's much, much easier. They're much more on the edge at that point towards the end of the race, especially a race like this with tire management. So just a little bit more improvement in his tire management, and I think he would have won that race. And I mentioned to you in private conversation last season, he lost the Australian race. He was in the lead in the last lap or two. I can't remember exactly if it was the last lap or the last lap, but one. He went from first to fifth because his tires just came off a cliff. And his strategy at that point was go as far as possible and deal with the falling off gradually. But he just miscalculated by 1 or 2 laps. And that's how close these margins are. And that's why I'm not too hard on him because, yes, he's a top rider and people can say, well, you should always make the best decision. And he usually does. He's got a lot of points. He's slid behind a little bit, Pecco. But, anyways, it's unfortunate for him. He's going to hurt. He's already hurting about it. So, big story, though, big change in the championship and the fact that Pecco was behind him. Now he's leading by 10 points. The other thing,
I have to disagree with you. The edge is the
mhm,
same. The edge is the same whether you're racing a car or you're racing a motorcycle. The only difference is when you cross that edge, you've still got four
right,
wheels planted instead of two, so you don't end up on your noggin or high
right,
siding or sliding. Yeah. Anyway, let's go
yeah,
on.
yeah, that's right. So we had great rides from Alex Marquez, who has been a bit of a shadow to
Big
his
time.
brother. I remember Alex is a Moto 3 champion, a Moto 2 champion, but he took about 5 years to get his Moto 2 championship. So he's definitely not a fast, right off the bat rider, but he's accomplished. And I remember a few years ago, Mark being asked, what about your brother coming into MotoGP? And Mark said, well, it's very difficult to be the son of or the brother of. He didn't say of what, but obviously of one of the
Right.
greatest. And
Right.
so Alex and Luca Marini, who's with Honda, who's Valentino Rossi's half brother, but because Marini doesn't have his last name, I think that saves him from some of the flack. This
Yeah.
nonsense, like, well, you're not Valentino, you're not Mark.
Right.
Well, of course they're not. They're different people,
Right.
but
Right.
they're both accomplished in their own way. So great ride from Alex.
Very smooth.
Enea came back from ninth. Yes. But for me, Mark coming back from 13th to second, a few years ago, back in 2017, I gave you a phone call and I said, we talked about Formula One because we've been watching Formula One for years, you much longer than I have. And actually, when we first met, I think we were both surprised that we even knew about Formula One because at the time in Canada, outside of Quebec, not very big sport, right?
Mhm.
So
Very elite.
I said, I found this. I started watching MotoGP and I said, there's this rider who reminds me of Gilles Villeneuve in the fact that he finds the limit by going over it and coming back to it, whereas most go find the limit by gradually building up to it. And growing up, I didn't wasn't really into sports until my early 20s, and Formula One, same thing. Excuse me. So I missed the entire Gilles Villeneuve thing, but I read all about him and so forth, and understood that he was an extraordinary skilled driver who could get the maximum out of his car, but he's also very intelligent. And the
Mhm.
intelligence and the racecraft was often looked over about, well, look how spectacular he is, and that's about it. And Mark, the same thing. This to manage the tires from 13th to second, to get so close to winning
Mhm.
his uh, there's a race in Silverstone in 2019 where he was going through the last corner, the last lap. You know, you're leaned over and the tire was sliding and he could barely have any traction and he just lost by thousandths of a second in second place. So this kind of racecraft from Enea and Mark is just so nice to witness. This is what I watch racing for, basically. So Mark obviously gets my rider of the race, and I'm going to rate it as 7. What did you think of the comeback rides from Enea and Mark?
Eh, whatever. Um, um, yeah. What you also have to throw in there that the bike that Mark is on shouldn't doesn't belong at the front. I don't think it belongs at the front. And so for him to do what he did, yeah, it's I mean that's the sign for me as a racing fan is when somebody takes a machine and puts it where it doesn't belong. And
Yeah.
Mark has been doing that consistently this year. Um,
Mhm.
and so it's actually kind of common for me to pick Mark again, but you kind of have to pick Mark for what he did, and
Yeah.
just to watch him was fantastic. And the passes
Mhm.
were clean. Um,
And they
some of
were
them
deep too. Like that
ballsy,
on the
yeah,
last coming from that last corner,
yes.
he just but they were
Uh,
clean, very very good. And Danea had a great few last laps with Morbidelli too, great racing there. So
I think that maybe
just
the track kind of affects my rating of the race. As you said, my love is elevation changes, love
yes,
elevation changes, and so I'm going to give it an 8. I have to
right.
go ahead of you,
Okay.
which is not normal, is it? But I thought it was
No.
fantastic.
And we had two brothers on the podium. The last time was in 1997 at Imola, the Ioki brothers.
Right?
And Pecco passes Casey Stoner for his the 24th victory with the Ducati. So Pecco,
Wow.
great ride as well. But I have to give it to Mark just because of his ability with the tires, just spectacular.
Hmm.
So next up is Silverstone, and I'm really looking forward to it. As mentioned in the news, they're going to the a livery celebration for the 75th anniversary, so vintage livery. So all the teams will have it. Really looking forward to that. And when we talk about Silverstone, we should do a little bit of vintage thing too. So
So
very
so
much looking forward to that.
When you say
Mhm.
vintage livery, are you talking about livery from 75 years ago?
It's up to the teams. They can select
Okay.
whatever they want from the entire history. It could be way back 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Okay.
So we haven't seen any examples yet. So really, really looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. It's
All
going to
right,
be fun.
great. Yep. Thanks, John. Talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Ciao.
Bye.